Good morning. Hi, hello. Happy second day of RSA, full day. Hope everyone's doing really well and enjoying their morning this morning. Hopefully you had some breakfast, some coffee, and you're ready to go on a trip to an island. If you did not get a raffle ticket, please raise your hand. I have some lovely friends in the back who are happy to assist and get you a raffle ticket because we have some awesome prizes I'll be raffling off at the end here. So we're going to be helping Ray, who's my CISO. We have a Lego kit called Ray the Castaway, and we're going to try to have Ray not be a castaway. We're going to have Ray be on a team. And then we also have some fun island-themed drink containers that you can use for the beverage of your choice. So I'll raffle those off at the end, but if you did not get a ticket, please raise your hand so you can get that. So like Ray said, my name is Megan Jacot. I'm a security engineer. I love giving back to the community. I love to learn. And it's a really great pleasure of mine to be here with you. And I've always been someone who just enjoys figuring out how do you break things? And once you've broken them, what do you do with that? And so I think that's where a lot of threat modeling comes into play, because one of the things that we do in Inspective, we do pen testing, we do bug bounty, and we figure out the vulnerabilities. And once you find all these vulnerabilities, what do? Well, you can threat model them. I'll leave this here for a moment so you can read this. If you've been to any other talk so far, you've seen disclaimers, but if you have not yet, here's the RSA disclaimer. So take a look at that. I'd also encourage you to do the surveys. Those exist for my talk, for all the other talks. And also to silence your cell phones, although that was a very nice ring. Okay. Islands can be beautiful, right? We're here in San Francisco. We're not technically on an island unless the big earthquake comes and we kind of drift off. But being by the water is beautiful, right? It's lovely. Does anyone know where this is? This is a photo I took last year. Any guesses? Oh, it's a good guess. Yeah. This is Hawaii, the big island. I love the framing of the shaping with the tree and the shadow. And they can be absolutely stunning and beautiful. But they can also be isolating. They can be expensive. It can be hard to bring all the resources in. It can be hard to bring people together. And so one of the things that we're going to be focusing on today is if you're on an island, if you're stranded, if you're Ray the Castaway, how can we come together and build that team and bring in the resources and bring everyone together in a way that's effective? So that message in the bottle, right? Help. How do we bring help to the team so that the team is able to do what they need to do? How do we choose the team? How do we organize and coordinate that group? So that will be a lot of the things that we'll be working on today. And thinking through, why do we want to build that team? Now, just raise your hands. Who's on a team here? Okay, look around. I hope all of you are. Unless you're a solopreneur and you just started your company, haven't hired anyone else. Other than that, you probably have a team. And if you don't have a team yet, you're going to be building your team. So I hope that I already have a little bit of buy-in for the idea that teams are important because you're on a team. And we're going to be exploring a little bit further about the building of that and how we implement, how we get buy-in from various stakeholders as well. My perspective is that with threat modeling, we need feedback from a variety of team members, not just security, to get different perspectives for what it is that we're looking at in security. Okay. Take a moment, breathe. Can anyone do all this on their own? One person. They shouldn't, because they'll fail. They will not be doing it well, right? This is not one person's job. I threw up this visual. It's an open source project. It's wonderfully done. I have the resource at the end. Just to really demonstrate for us, the stuff we do is really complicated. When you diagram it out, this is really complicated. It cannot be done by one person. It needs a team. It needs a variety of stakeholders. And so when you start actually visualizing all of the things. And this is just an S3 bucket, right? Just an S3 bucket. So these are all the pieces that go into that. And then you start adding in other parts of your infrastructure. It can't just be done by one person. It has to be done by a team. So where do we begin? How do we start? What do we do? So we really need to think through building a coalition of the willing, right? I started earlier on by asking a question. Who of you is on a team here, right? And you can think through, you've been on good teams, you've been on bad teams, hopefully you're on an effective team right now. Maybe there's ways that that team could improve. But you know that you've been on teams where you've had people who are curious, people who really are passionate about what they're doing. And it's starting to find those people and building your coalition of the willing. So that's going to be part of how we start. And then we're going to get into planning. So this is part of my team. We've got Ray over there. He's got his fancy jacket on. So like I said, we're helping Ray the Castaway. It's the Lego kit we have. And the thing is, with building a team, you don't have to always get along, right? Like you can see here, we've got Family Feud. It doesn't have to be all like roses and puppies, even though there are some lovely pictures of puppies in the hallway. It doesn't have to be. But there should be a general sense of, coming together at the end around the same purpose. And there can be clashes, and a lot of times those clashes can end up like deriving into something really effective. Because if you all have that groupthink, that can be really ineffective as a team. So it's how do you build that group where you all feel comfortable bringing your authentic self to work and sharing those thoughts. And it's building that space where people feel like they can share what they think and say, hey, I think we need to really further examine the way we're doing IAM and look into that a little bit deeper. So people are able to share more and maybe share an opinion that maybe not everyone there thinks the same, and that's okay. So we'll dig into that a little bit deeper as we get into building the team. So when you think about who's on your team, right? Like who are your key players? I want you to expand that idea a little bit. So when we think through a coalition of the willing, we have to think through who is interested in threat modeling actually. When you talk about being proactive, when you talk about dealing with vulnerabilities, who raises their hand and is like, yeah, that's fascinating, that's really interesting to me. Who on the security team could help? Who in an engineering team, who in a dev role might be interested? Does it make sense for your organization to involve people from other departments? I hope so, because I think that can bring in really interesting perspectives. And how can you gain an accurate understanding of what it is that you're trying to threat model for your organization? So how can you think through, these are the metrics we want to use, this is how we're going to do this, and this is how we'll approach it. And there are a lot of different models. I'll go through several, and we'll talk about choosing the model for you. So when you're building a team, there can be many different members of it. So these are just several examples, right? You could have people from a NOC, you could have people from a SOC, you could have people in an OT type of a role, maybe you have people from the legal side, HR. And so this is kind of where you're really trying to think through from a very broad perspective how different threats might affect your organization, and you're pulling in people from different departments. So, maybe you are a CISO at your organization, but you obviously know people in HR. And so there's someone in the HR department that finds this stuff fascinating, and that could be your coalition of the willing person from the HR department. And then maybe there's also someone in marketing who is really intrigued by being proactive in security as well. And same thing, that person could get tagged into looking at threats, because threats to your brand and threats in social media can be a big deal too. So kind of thinking through it from multiple perspectives and how you can bring in people. And it can also be a way to spread security awareness too to people who maybe are not necessarily in security. many doors, many choices exist, right? So I mentioned a little bit ago, there are multiple threat models. If you've been doing this a while, you should be familiar with them, but there are multiple. It's not necessarily that there's the one model, that there can only be one, that this is the way. It's more so that at that moment, you'll pick the right one for your organization, and it might be potentially the wrong choice. You try it out and you switch, but you might be doing testing. You might even do, like, set up 2 groups and have an A/B testing that you do. For example, like if you're trying to focus more on privacy, you might focus on the Linden model. So that might be something that you do. If you're trying to focus on threat actors and their capabilities, you might focus on the Diamond model. So it really depends on what you are trying to achieve with your threat modeling and which door you choose to step through. So no door is necessarily the wrong door. It's more about what's going to work for your organization and what you're trying to achieve. As you're trying to make those choices, you're going to want to think through, what are different pieces that you already know? What are some of your pieces that you know that you don't know, right? So you don't have observability into? What are things that you might have biases? And so this is where having that team that's from all sorts of different departments might come into play. Having a really diverse team might be really beneficial because you can ward against those biases. And then the unknown unknowns can be really quite difficult to encounter because you literally don't know those. And oftentimes we find that the more we learn, the more we know that we don't know. But as we're just trying to go through figuring out what our vulnerabilities are and figuring out mapping those, we can try to navigate and try to get most towards the known knowns. So trying to get to as much of this as possible to try to avoid the rest of those. But keeping in mind that we will always have biases, keeping in mind that we will always have unknowns. So we're going to spend a little bit of a while doing a case study, and that's going to focus on something that most of you should be familiar with, may have probably lived through. If you are newer to industry, you did not live through it, but it was very special a few years back. I have also heard it given multiple names. Sometimes people call it wanna drink instead of wanna cry. And so we're gonna focus on that from both a proactive and reactive side of things, and think about how you might have threat modeled that, because it still does exist out there. And we're gonna kind of reference that with different threat models too. So to give a little bit of a background on it, it was massive attack, ransomware attack, that affected 300,000 computers worldwide in 150 countries. And just to give the stat for that, there's 195 countries, so it pretty much affected the whole world. And this was happening in 2017 in May. It exploited a vulnerability in Windows and SMB. A patch had been released, but fairly close to when it happened, so just a few months prior to. And it was a Wormhole ransomware, and required payments to decrypt it, or you basically lost a lot of things. And it affected many, many organizations, such as the NHS in the UK. And for example, they estimated that it cost them £92 million in lost output and IT costs. So a tremendous effect across the world, and very much so something that we speak to today. And so we could think through different ways that a team might approach this, right? So same thing as we were looking at that visual before, no one individual could deal with this. This is very much so it takes a team. And so we'll kind of think through this. So when something has happened, we can be reacting to it, or we can be thinking through from a, breach will occur or threats will occur, et cetera, and we can be proactive. So we're first going to look at a reactive approach and think, okay, this attack has happened. How will different members of a team respond to it? So for example, a security analyst could respond to this by noticing that it exists in the network traffic, seeing alerts for it. They could report this to their manager, so working together with that team, and they could escalate this to senior management. A security engineer could isolate affected machines. They could prevent further spread of the ransomware. They could back up any data. They could try to restore that data that was backed up. And so they could work together with that analyst who's noticed and then start acting upon this, right? So, but this is all after it's been noticed, so we're all reacting to this. A security architect could take a look at the ransomware code. They could identify its origin. They could work with malware reverse engineers. They could look at the behavior. They could see if there's kill switch involved. They could look for vulnerability weaknesses and see if there's a way to decrypt the data without paying. A manager could coordinate with other IT managers and engineers. They could work on a patch plan. So a program manager could work together to implement a Windows patching plan for the latest updates and install various software solutions. And they could communicate with senior management. They could bring in the legal department to respond to various stakeholders. They might bring in the public relations department also if they need to issue a statement, and coordinate with external stakeholders for incident status and impact. So we think through that NHS organization, right, that had that huge impact. They had to cancel operations and appointments for patients. So tremendous amount of coordination had to happen there with their external stakeholders, the patients, and the physicians and nurses and the care teams that existed in order to coordinate all of that and communicate all of that out. And so when I say like it takes a team, it's not just one individual person, right? It's everyone working together. But we think through this, once again, this is all reacting, right? So this is a situation, we're reacting to it, we have not threat modeled it. A security consultant could then advise senior management on if they should pay or not pay, what they should do, should they risk assess it, hopefully they do, and think through policies. And once you start getting into looking at policies, we're starting to get more into the proactive, right? So you're starting to get more into the what do we do next. So switching over to the proactive side, right? And I've always been myself like a planner, and I think that's why I lean more into threat modeling, because we are trying to think through what might happen, what could happen, and how do we deal with that. And so how do we prepare for a future incident? Because we know there will be, right? We know there will be other incidents. And so how do we prepare for that? How do we work together as a team? And we can use these past data points to see what went well. We can do a post-mortem and think through, okay, these are the things that worked really well. These are the ways that we could improve a bit. And those are also the places where if ego can be taken out of it and if it's a safe space to just discuss the things that happened, that can lead to really, really good conversations around how one can improve, if that culture exists in an organization. So let's talk through being proactive for a bit. So what would various team members do if they're being proactive? So a security analyst could collect information about the system that was attacked. So keeping with that WannaCry example, could collect information about WannaCry, such as its architecture, data flows, trust boundaries, assets, entry points, gather all this evidence, and then they could use this to create a diagram that represents the system and its environment. So they're starting to create visuals to see, okay, this is what it looked like, this is what happened, this is what another attack of this nature might look like. So just starting to visualize and analyze what that might look like and thinking through, okay, these are the ways this attack came in. We might need to harden these parts of our system. A security engineer would then work with the analyst to classify those threats using a framework, potentially STRIDE, which we'll talk about in a moment. They would consider how an attacker could spoof identities, how they could tamper with data or code, how they could repudiate actions, how they could look at elevating privileges, etc. They could evaluate existing security controls for their effectiveness against these threats and see what needs to be done differently based off of what happened. An architect could analyze likelihood and impact about the internal systems. Maybe they use PASTA, for example. They could look at exploits and vulnerabilities. They could see what's used to cause harm for objectives on assets. They could also assess the risk level of each threat based on factors such as exposure, severity, and probability. So getting a little bit more into metrics. A manager could help prioritize the communication of these threats and look at mitigations. They could look at threat modeling manifesto. They could align processes. And they could develop practices to follow changes and iterations of those changes and involve all the stakeholders together so that they're monitoring the outcomes of the threat model. A security consultant could implement countermeasures to reduce or eliminate threats using best practices and policies. A CISO could oversee the threat modeling process and ensure that it aligns with the organization's security strategy and goals. A head of engineering could think through developing and deploying software patches and fixing the vulnerabilities exploited by WannaCry. They could coordinate with other IT managers. A CTO might evaluate the impact and look at the technology and infrastructure and capabilities. A chief revenue officer might assess financial loss and think through public relations and how they might restore customer confidence, loyalty. A pen tester might perform attacks on a system using WannaCry's code and methods to test the resilience. So they might see, okay, you made all these changes. Let's see, how did they work? A public relations officer might go in and manage communications and discuss with stakeholders. And an incident response coordinator would coordinate and oversee response activities. And so all of these different team members would be key people within an organization helping to make sure that both the response was effective, but then learning from an attack and thinking through how will we do things differently for another attack. Like how did that, if they experience WannaCry, how did that go? What would we do differently? So they would be working together to switch things more over to the proactive side of things. So I've already mentioned several threat models. We're going to look at those kind of briefly. And there are other talks this week that are on threat models, so I encourage you to check some of those out. And there's a lot of really great literature on these as well. And I have some of those references in one of my slides. So we think about all the different issues that one might encounter. And one way that we can categorize them is with STRIDE. And so we can analyze the threat categorization. We can look at identification, and we can use this for mapping. And so this can be really effective for an organization to use collectively to think through what are different issues they're encountering. And so what are issues that they have encountered, or what are issues that they may encounter? And so I'll just switch back to a few slides. So kind of going from reactive to proactive. So you can either use it in either of those ways. Another one that can be used that's a little bit more quantitative is dread. And so you can use this with creating ratings for things. And so really, if you think about like that first word there, it's damage. What is the damage to your organization? And this is where I do think it's, once again, really helpful to have people from different parts of your organization involved, because my idea of damage as a security professional can be really different than the HR person's perspective, than someone in marketing, than someone in sales. And so I think involving those different stakeholders and getting their perspectives of what would damage mean to you if WannaCry happened. What does damage mean to the nurse who now can't see their patient, right? It's gonna be really different. I mean, I might be really aligned with them in that sense, but like they might have different perspectives and thoughts on that. And so I think that is really important to involve even your end users too, and get that perspective. A lot of the other parts of dread do relate more to security, like can it be reproduced? It's gonna be more technical, exploitability, more technical. Affected users, same thing. You can involve non-security people in that as well. Discoverability can go either way. It can be more technical, or you can have people who are less technical noticing that that exists. So, but yeah, I think damage is one that can be really well approached from multiple stakeholders. This is one of my favorite models. I really enjoy being able to analyze things from the multiple points of the diamond model. And you can use this for looking at what a threat actor can do. This is one I put together about the Lapsus group. And so they're not so much doing things right now, but they're kind of an interesting group of teens that were bored. Think about redirecting that energy. And so you can think through mapping out, and oftentimes the diamond model, you're chaining diamonds. So it's not just one single diamond like you see here. You're seeing multiple ones and having them go through pivots with it. But it can be really useful for analyzing complex APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups, and looking at what organizations they target, like what types of organizations they target, looking at group alikes, looking at capabilities. Maybe you are in the financial tech industry, the fintech industry, and there is a particular group that tends to target you, and you can see, oh, you know, they tend to use this way to get in. We should probably go and make sure, you know, RDP is all set. So kind of thinking through that. So one of the things to think through is innovation is hard, right? Like I went to a talk yesterday that was a little impromptu, all about innovation and how we can work together as a community to innovate. And it is, but it can be really interesting and fantastic in the ways that we can build new things. And this is one of the things I'm most excited about with threat modeling, is being able to do threat modeling as code. And so it is something that it's fairly new, but there's a lot of work that's being done on this. A lot of really fantastic open source projects. You can find a lot of those through OWASP. Some of them, for example, are like PyTM, so Python threat modeling, or threat modeling Dragon. And it allows for parts of uncertainty to be taken out. So you imagine a team coming together and another team in the same organization, and you look at all the same threats, but you come up with completely different threat models. So it's not reproducible at all. So the more we are able to automate it and come up with different ways that it is standardized, it is then able to be reproduced from organization to organization. And it's less subjective, it's more objective. And I think that's both pretty fascinating and also makes it faster. Because if you have actually threat modeled something small or threat modeled something massive, it can take a really long time. And so we all know we're really busy, right? So how do you try to take this and make it a little bit less busy? How do you make it like a little bit smoother, a little bit easier for a team? And so that's one of the things that I'm very excited about is seeing more automation and threat modeling as code. And I'm very interested to see where that goes. But I think cool things ahead for that. So, okay, so we have talked about people being on a team. We've talked about some different threat models. We've talked about, choosing a door. We've talked about threat modeling as code. How do we put it all together, right? So one of the ways is this. So I came up with this, which is a little meta, but it's threat modeling the model. It's modeling the model. So let me go back. You have to create the model. You have to choose a model. And so when you're thinking through this, you have to both choose a model and then create a model. And then once you've done that, you have to identify your threats, right? So, okay, so we have chosen a model, we've created our model. Now we actually start looking, right? First of all, what do we want to threat model? I recommend starting small. So maybe you have a web app, maybe you have a mobile app, maybe you have a website, maybe you have a physical infrastructure, but choose one thing. Don't choose like your whole infrastructure. Like it will be too much to start with. So choose one thing, choose something small, test it out, iterate it, see how it goes. But you're working on seeing how that team works together too, right? So then, once you have identified the threats, you need to start figuring out, okay, well, what do we do? That's where, once with your threat model, you actually start then figuring out your prioritization of your threats, right? So you start thinking like, okay, these are the ones that we're actually going to work on. We're going to address these ones. And, we don't always address all of the things that we find, right? So which ones are you going to prioritize? Which ones are you going to accept? And then how are you communicating those findings? So hopefully the whole team that you built together, you communicate with that whole team, but maybe you have additional stakeholders that you're communicating. So are you writing some sort of report? Are you just sharing bullet points? Are you just verbally sharing? But how are you communicating what you found? And then at this point, you've found threats, you've addressed them, you've done some sort of mitigation. How do you know it worked, right? Like, how do you know it was successful? So you want to validate that, you want to actually test that. And then it comes back again because then you need to model it again because things are always changing and you need to see, okay, well, what new threats exist? And we need to now test those, and now we need to address those, and now we need to communicate them and test them again. So it ends up being very cyclical, but so are many things in life. But yeah, we work together and we kind of build the team and we create the model and test it all out. So sometimes we build very creepy, sad snowmen and icy times. And other times we create in like very busy times and it's fiery. And so no matter what is happening, no matter like what's existing in our lives or our work cycles, having pacing and working with other people can be really helpful. When we're creating that model, we've already chosen a model and we're done with picking a framework. We need to define a scope. We have to determine our resources. We have to narrow. We have to have knowledge of our system. We have to have knowledge of our programs, of our legal and compliance requirements, and determine details about our attack surface. And as I was stating earlier, I really recommend starting broad and then narrowing. So like starting with like this one thing that you're gonna approach, and then you can open up and choose more things. And so you don't want to add in all of the things at first. So when you're determining your threats, how do you determine if it's an actual threat or if it's just a cactus? And to reiterate, I think this is where it's really important to have this mix of people with different backgrounds involved in threat modeling. It requires people with security knowledge as well as a deep understanding of what is being threat modeled. Because you're looking at your own systems and you want to know what actually could affect them, as opposed to what is just part of design. What is just that cactus hanging out. Once you have determined this, you're going to think through and remove components that introduce the threats in the first place. You're gonna probably make some changes. You'll probably add in some controls that address the threat, and these are often preventative. And you might work through ways to think about knowing if your mitigations are effective. You could also transfer risk that is associated with a threat to another entity. And by default, all threats are accepted if you do not threat model, if you do not decide what you're going to do with them. So in order to prioritize your threats, you do need to risk assess them and think about your likelihood multiplied by impact. So thinking about what would actually happen to your organization if this occurred. Huge fan of communication and documentation and sharing out the things. So one of the points from earlier, when you're going through this process, you've built the team, you're modeling it, now you need to share out the findings. So you do need to document things and communicate them, because if you don't document and you don't communicate, how will other people on your team know? And how will other groups know too? So we can learn from each other, right? We're all here at a conference. And people within your organization can learn from each other. So we should be tracking, we should be having metrics, we should have data. We should use that data and communicate it and figure out, like, these were our threats, this is how we mitigated them, this worked, this didn't work, these were the outcomes. Within our documentation, we should be looking at both actions and non-actions. So what did we choose to do? What did we choose to not do? And thinking through how we prioritize things for engineering, ops, and cyber teams. We should have systems for tracking that allows stakeholders to look at the statuses of what's been happening, to look at mitigation. And think through who our key stakeholders are. Who needs to really know the findings of the threat model? And your organization will have different ways that you use, like, standard practices for communication, I hope, that are established. But if they're not, like, think through what would be the best way to communicate these findings. What would work best for the team, like discuss it amongst yourselves, and what would work best for your organization. When you're going through one of the final stages, which is validating the model, you should try to think through, did you cover the right components? Did you find enough threats? Like, if you just found one thing and it's a pretty new code base, you might not have found enough things. You might not have thought about enough angles. You might want to bring in some different team members who might be thinking about this from a different perspective. Are you acting on the threats you found? Did you choose actions? Did you just accept all the risk? Was it part of design? Are there things you need to change? is the approach to threat modeling working? So try to be analytic about what you're doing, like, because there are different threat models. Is the one we chose the right one for what we're doing? And should we maybe switch? Oh, we're not really working with threat actors. Well, we probably don't want to use the diamond model. So try to think about like what makes the most logical sense for what you're doing. You know, did you record any threats in any sort of way? Did you identify appropriate actions for them? And do you need to try different approaches for different stages in the process? So just to reiterate one more time, these are the 5 stages that I was walking through that you can do together as a team. And very much so consider them cyclical, that you can be going through this over and over again. So as we get close to wrapping up, I'll do one more reminder to do a survey. If you did not get a raffle ticket and still want one, please raise your hand because we will be doing that shortly. Got one over there. And what are our key takeaways? So I hope that you can read the Threat Modeling Manifesto if you haven't. I'll have that in my resources. It's fantastic. It is very straightforward and just walks through a lot of the stuff that I was talking through. And take a look more deeply at 1 to 2 threat models. Longer time, I hope that you can work on building that team if you haven't already, and that you as a team can work on picking a model together and trying it out, seeing if it's the right model for you. And that in the next half year, that you can actually start trying out a threat model, see if the results work the way you want them to work, and communicate out those findings. So these are a whole series of resources, a lot of the things that I was mentioning, but the slides will also be online, and I have a QR code for the slides here as well, but either way, they'll be on RSA's website. One more reminder about the survey. I'm happy to connect with you all and also happy to answer questions. And if everyone has received their raffle ticket, I'll also do raffles. Yeah? Awesome. So we're raffling off 3 prizes. And thank you so much for being here with me today. And I'll take questions too if anyone has questions. We've got a couple minutes. Thank you. Bag of things. Okay. We'll do raffles and then questions just for fun. Okay. You have to be here to win. 461030. 461030. Yeah, awesome. Sir, please take one of the tropical glasses. Okay. 461029. Awesome. Also one of the tropical glasses. Woo! Okay, last but not least is our Lego kit. 461082. Yeah. Awesome. You get the Lego kits, the Ray the Castaway. So thank you once again all for being here. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Have a great rest of your day.